You're on, Jasper.
Welcome everybody to the weekly NCSG CSIA Zoom meeting webinar. Today, John Meredith is going to be our host. He's got an excellent panel up for you guys. I highly encourage you guys to ask questions, type them in, and John will go and ask the panelists. And if you have any suggestions for future subjects, please air those out and we'll see what we can work in for you next week. So, John Meredith, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jasper. I really appreciate you and all the hard work that you and Chuck are doing for the Guild right now. Just want to introduce briefly our panelists. As you know, Jasper Dringler is president of the NCSG, Chuck Roydhouse, president of the CSIA. We have a special guest with us, Brian Burbrink, who's an attorney with Ogletree Deacons. And I've asked him to come and provide some color around some of the new employment issues that we'll be facing because of the recent COVID legislation. And then we have two A-list stars on the call today. Is Joe Ochal, who's I'll talk a little bit more about him later. He's a microbiologist. He developed an in-home sanitary technique I think you'll find useful if you're not already using it or haven't seen it. And then we have Alan Rush, who's he really doesn't need any introduction. He's the president of Rush Profits, is an in-home sales trainer. So I think that so if you guys scroll over the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a little icon that says Q&A. Right above that, there's two little boxes. So all the questions today will be asked. If you would ask those in the Q&A box, if you scroll down to the middle of your screen, you'll see the Q&A icon there. Just hit that, ask your questions. We're going to hold the questions till the end, except for when we get to Brian's section. Brian's going to jump off after his part's over. So we'll take questions for Brian after he gives his presentation. So, but guys, you know, business is tough right now, right? And so business has always been hard, but I think it's been a little harder these last few weeks. And a lot of us that provide home services, we're really facing some significant headwinds. And, you know, people just don't want to give up their GFC, their green folding cash, as my friend Skip Criswell refers to it. And they're a little bit afraid to have people in their homes right now, right? So, you know, these are kind of the cards we've been dealt. And so we need to play these cards the best we can. So we can't do a lot about the general, you know, lack of consumer confidence that's out there right now, the general fear that we're seeing in the marketplace. Because let's face it, guys, people are just afraid to kind of spend money right now because they don't know how this thing's going to play out. But there are still a lot of people that, you know, want you in their homes and that need your services. And so what my experience has been that people will do business with people they trust. And there are things that we can and we should be doing now to help alleviate the fears and concerns that people have. I'm going to share my screen now. And we'll talk about a resource that I put together for you. So, you know, I spent the last week pulling together some resources and just really a great panel today. And I think you'll find today's webinar very helpful as many states begin to ease up on their, you know, shelter-in-place directives and the country begins to restart. So, but the reality is people are still afraid of having their homes, right? Because you might infect them with a potentially deadly virus. So this will likely be the new normal for the next several years. This isn't going away. It's kind of like 9/11 changed air travel. I think that, you know, this recent COVID pandemic is really going to change the way we do business. So to bring your business back faster, I think we need to do as an industry, do everything we can to help ease the fears that our customers are going to have about having us in their homes. So I think this all begins with what you do internally and what you do in the home. So this is a resource document that you will receive after the end of this webinar today. And it'll be sent out from the Guild. And I'm not going to go through this document line by line, but we're going to hit a couple of highlights here. So I would encourage you to develop an in-house infection prevention and control plan. Okay, so I've provided some resources here that you may find helpful. If you see the blue links in the document, you simply hit those and these resources will pop up. You'll be able to see those. So here's one called Interim Guidance for Businesses and Employers to Plan and Respond to Coronavirus. And in this document, there's a lot of great links and resources. There's printable flyers and there's videos and lots of great resources for you here as you develop your in-house control procedures. So also there's another document, Guidance on Preparing Workplaces for COVID. It's an OSHA document you might find very helpful. We've provided our employees with training on the symptoms of COVID so that we kind of know what that looks like if them or a coworker may, display symptoms. And I just put together a simple memo that basically in a memo format that, and in that memo, I started off with a wellness statement. So this is how we instructed our people to report if symptoms they might be having about COVID. So, and I'll just simply read that. You may want to include this in your memo or your plan or your procedures or whatever you call it, your policies. If you or anyone in your household has COVID-19 symptoms, please stay home and report it immediately to your supervisor. Don't return to work until you and or a family member have been seen by a doctor. If you start feeling ill while on the job, separate yourself from the other employees and report it immediately to your supervisor. Go home and not return to work until you've been seen by a doctor. And then in that, there's also some additional resources here that you may find helpful that talk about what to do. These are all printable flyers and things like that you can provide to your employees as you coach them and train them in some of these new things you want to do. So what should you do? How do you handle a situation if one of your employees or a member of their household is impacted by COVID? So you will want to check with your attorney and your CPA to see how some of the recent legislation that's been passed, what they call the CARES Act, which is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, and also the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. Those are two big pieces of legislation that were recently passed, and those will affect you as an employer. So, there may be certain legal and or tax implications at both the federal and state level. I've included in this document some resources that you may find helpful. One is from the Department of Labor called Frequently Asked Questions, and it covers the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And then the other one is as a resource from the DOL and the CARES Act. So in addition to that, we've partnered with, and we're very honored to have Brian Burbrink, who's an attorney with Ogletree Deacons. Brian is an expert in employment law. Brian he's with Ogletree Deacons is probably, in my opinion, the premier firm for employment issues in the country. They're an international firm. They have an office here in Indianapolis, and I've used this firm, and they've been always giving me sound advice. So with that, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk about some of the things that you're seeing now that we need to know as employers and some of the resources that you provided in our resource document.
Perfect. Thank you, John. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to speak with you, and also want to just say how honored I am to be partnered with Saver Systems and John Meredith, who I think are putting on a great service here. Look, we are all ready to get back to work. We want to be safe, but we want to get back to work. And what John has put together here is a way for us to do so, and to do so safely, and to give our customers, your customers, confidence that when you do come into their homes, that you have taken all the right precautions with your staff. You have dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, and you're making sure that you're able to provide your services in a safe and effective manner. And my role today is to talk with you a little bit about the employment law implications, just a few of them, because there are quite a few, that relate to sort of getting back to work and getting your folks back into the homes of your customers as soon as you can to provide those services. So as you can see on the screen that John is presenting here, I've given you guys a number of different documents. John, if you could go ahead and open the first one, the memo. So this is a guidance memo, and I'll just talk through it while it's popping up on your screen. It's a guidance memo that relates to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is a law that was passed just a few weeks ago and went into effect on April 1st. For some reason, it's having trouble popping up, but I'll just give you a little bit of an outline as to what it is. For the first time ever, the federal government has required employers to provide paid leave, paid sick leave, and paid family leave for employers who have 500 or less employees, and under certain circumstances that relate to COVID-19 or the coronavirus. So the law in particular provides for up to 2 weeks of paid sick leave and up to an additional 10 weeks of paid family leave under certain qualifying conditions. And I'm gonna go through some of those for you now. Number one, if your employee is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19, they might be eligible for leave. If they've been advised by their healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19, if they're experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and are also seeking a medical diagnosis, if they are caring for an individual who is subject to a quarantine order or an order from their healthcare provider to stay home due to COVID-19, if they're caring for a son or daughter whose school has been closed due to COVID-19, and I know in Indiana and Illinois, for example, that the schools have been closed until the end of this particular school year, so that might impact your employees. And then there's a kind of catch-all provision if one of your employees is experiencing substantially similar condition to COVID that's been specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services for the federal government. So those are qualifying leave reasons. So you, again, and each of those leaves sort of corresponds with a particular time period. First, we start with a 2-week leave for paid sick leave. And then after that, they could possibly be eligible for an additional leave of up to 10 weeks for a total of 12 weeks. There are certain of those qualifying reasons would allow them to receive their regular rate of pay up to $511 per day. If the leave is based on caring for somebody else, they're eligible for 2/3 of their pay, $200 per day and $2,000 in the aggregate. And again, the memo that will be provided will give you all of those resources and kind of outline it for you. In addition, the memo also goes, there's a small exception that's been carved out for employers that have less than 50 employees. And the memo that I provided will give you some information about what that exception is, in what circumstances it applies, and how you would go about meeting that exception if and when any government agency is looking into your business practices. What I've also provided you is a sample leave policy under the FFCRA, 2 of them. One is for the emergency paid sick leave, and the other is for the emergency paid family leave. Again, the paid sick leave is for a 2-week period or an 80-hour period, and the family leave is for an additional 10 weeks after those first 2 weeks. And those policies are applicable, again, to any employer who has 500 or less employees. So gone ahead and done that for you guys, providing it to you. And then the next thing down the list there is a template request. So if one of your employees asks for leave under this act due to circumstances related to COVID, you would give them this form. They would fill it out and certify the basis for their leave, why they need to take the leave, and then they would sign what we call an attestation, which means that there are penalties if they provide information to you, their employer. And so the idea there is that they would have to attest that they're taking leave for reasons that qualify under the act. So again, we provided you with all of those resources and as well as a small business exemption form. So if you do qualify, if you're 50 or less employees and you qualify for that exemption, I've given you the forms. Now, John, if you'll scroll down for me to the bottom of the page, we've also provided you some additional resources that I think are going to be pretty helpful for you. So we have on our website, and I think I've included these, and if I haven't, I'll certainly send them to you. But so the very bottom of the page, so closure orders. My firm is keeping track every single day. We have attorneys in 50 states who are providing updates on the various closure orders, sometimes referred to as the shelter in place or the stay-at-home orders. So you're not having to find those in your particular jurisdiction. They are all you can click that link, and that is updated every day. So you can get daily updates on the closure orders, what is an essential business, who's allowed to operate, who's not allowed to operate. And again, that changes every single day. So I could give you some information about it, but literally it would be null and void this time tomorrow, because it's constantly changing. And then the screening orders is the next resource I provided for you. That is what local states and municipalities are requiring if you do return your employees to work, what kind of screening they have to do. So what kind of PPE or protective gear they have to wear. And again, you're going to want to make sure that you're in compliance with your state law and with your local law before you put your employees back to work. Because number one, obviously you don't want to have the state or the federal government after you. But more importantly, I think from a customer service standpoint, you want to show everybody that you're taking all the proper precautions, you're doing the right things, you're a good employer, and your employees are going to have all the right protection in place before they ever consider entering somebody's home. And again, I welcome you guys to take a look at the resources, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time that anyone might have.
So thank you, Brian. All that is really great information. Just one question I have. If you took PPP money, did you have different obligations than an employer who did not?
You do. If you take PPP money, there's again, I don't want to get into all the specifics, but you have to maintain a certain number of employees over a certain period of time. So the deal there is you get the money, but you have to maintain your workforce, right? So you don't want to engage in additional furloughs or layoffs of your employees without consulting with outside counsel, or at least taking a look at those requirements, because otherwise you're going to have to pay the PPP back, and obviously you'd like to avoid that if you can.
So just at a high level, talk about some of the more restrictive areas that I looked at that document. It was kind of amazing. Like some places, really things didn't change much, but there was other places they had pretty restrictive guidance for, what you should be doing if you're considered an essential business. Can you talk at a high level about some of those things that you've seen that are more restrictive?
Yeah, I mean, I think even for example, every state has its own version of what is and what isn't an essential business. And obviously we've been hearing in the news lately that the state of Georgia is opening up today, and there are other states that are opening up. But some states, even if you are an essential business, if you can allow people to work from their home, you still have to do that. For other folks, if you're an essential business, you're still required to provide your folks with PPE, which means some sort of face protection. There are also requirements in each state regarding cleaning services. So if you're going to have people in your workforce, there are requirements that relate to how often and what type of cleaning products that you need to use. There are different requirements for example, if someone self-identifies as someone who has a pre-existing condition or is over the age of 65, you have to take additional precautions. So again, I think you're going to want to be aware of what the requirements are in your area. And again, you'll have those, we're providing those to you via the link. So just take a look at it. If you've got questions related to some of those requirements, let us know. But again, they're going to differ from state to state and sometimes city to city.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. That's an amazing resource. Great information for our industry. Thank you for providing that. Just a question popped up here is, what do you do if this is a great opportunity for you guys to ask questions. We have an expert in labor law that practices for employers. So what do you do if employee, in order to go back to work, I'll just read the question. When the go back to work is lifted, employees still afraid to go back to work because of the virus. Can the company fire the employee?
Yeah, so I've gotten this question a lot, and I think this is what I would call a facts and circumstances. So what I would do is I would work with the employee to understand why is it that he or she doesn't want to come back to work. I would talk with them about all the steps that are being taken to protect them. I would walk them through, steps that you've taken to comply with local law. And obviously the local law is based on CDC guidance. So the steps that you all are taking as employers are consistent with state and federal guidelines. And so I would try to convince them to come back to work because you've taken all the right steps. Now, if that doesn't work, you do have some options. I think you would work through with them, hey, do you have any additional paid time off if that's something that exists? But ultimately, if push comes to shove, and I think what we're seeing with the CARES Act especially, a lot of folks are thinking, well, maybe I'll just try to take unemployment because I can get my state's unemployment plus the CARES Act $600, and maybe that's my way out of coming to work, and I'll blame it on COVID. Well, there's number one, I would tell any employee who takes that approach, that's a short-sighted approach. You've got an opportunity to go to work for a good employer in a good industry, and the CARES Act is only going to provide you benefits through the end of July. And at the end of July, who knows where the economy is going to be? So my recommendation is to say, look, don't shoot yourself in the foot and rely on unemployment benefits that are only going to be there for a short period of time. Work with your company, come back to work, here's things we're doing to take care of you. And frankly, if you do decide not to show up for work and we're not able to certify that that's for a COVID-related reason, there's no guarantee that you're going to receive unemployment. So the good for employers is take the sure thing, which is we offer you a paycheck, we offer you protection, we offer you compliance with the law, and we're going to take care of you. And that's certainly better than anything that the state or the federal government might be able to do, when they're not going to be aware of your individual circumstances and they're not going to be able to pay you unemployment forever.
That's good. So I believe this next question talks about, we'll take probably this one and maybe one more. Talks about when you bring back employees. I think they're talking about if you took the PPP money, do you have to bring back the same employees or just the same amount of employees?
They're looking at the same amount of employees, right? The idea is that you're maintaining staffing levels. It doesn't have to be the same personnel, because, for example, that there may be things that happen during this period that are out of your control. Somebody had another opportunity come up. So no, what they're looking at is staffing levels and not specific names or individuals that you're maintaining. So you're going to want to keep your staffing levels at whatever the sort of pre-COVID levels would be, so that you qualify for the full relief that you're getting for the forgivable loans under the PPP. Okay,
thank you. Two more quick questions. Does the 2-week leave also apply for part-time employees?
It does. So there's no, it's full-time and part-time employees, and it's basically whoever was employed by you at any point in time after April 1st. So the law was sort of modeled after the FMLA, which may or may not apply to many of the folks on this call, because that requires a certain minimal threshold of employees, and they must have worked for you for over a year. The Family First Coronavirus Response Act, or the FFCRA, doesn't have the 1-year waiting period. And it applies to both full and part-time employees. Okay, great. Last question: is there any liability if the employer, if an employee contracts COVID while he's on the job site? So there can be. There are OSHA regulations, which is the federal health and safety law, and there's also state and local versions. The goal there is, and the resources, frankly, John, that you have provided will help to avoid those, right? So long as the employer is taking all the appropriate measures, is listening to the guidance of the CDC, of state and local government, that will minimize the potential for liability. But again, you're going to want to take all those measures, and you're going to want to pay attention to your employees. If they have a concern, you're going to want to listen to that concern. The liability comes when there's the creation of a risk of injury or death that the employee was aware of and could have or should have mitigated but didn't. And so the idea there is follow the guidelines and listen to your employees. If they have concerns, take those concerns seriously and try to remediate them to the best you can. If you need help from experts, outside counsel, or even folks like John's group, that would be a good time to consult with friends and get the advice that you need to avoid a liability. Okay, thank you. We got some more questions, but we've got to move on because of time restraints. So I'm happy to take those offline, John. And yeah, if you want to distribute those. Yeah, I was going to tell everybody in the memo provided is Brian's contact information. If you want to reach out to him individually, I'm sure he'd be glad to see what he can do to help you. And Brian, I really appreciate you joining us today. You've been an invaluable resource and answered some really tough questions I think we've all had. And the resources that you provided are really amazing. I love the charts at the end in the document, again, that you guys will receive this as a PDF document with all these links in it. Amazing resources for you, just
So use and enjoy. And Brian, thanks again for being on the call with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So I want to get back to our document here. I think Brian's guidance was really helpful. It's kind of know what to do as an employer. But I think the other thing that we need to be aware of here, and Joe's going to talk about his in-house sanitary technique here in a minute, but some of the things that we do at our place that you may want to include in your procedures that you put in place. And again, you know, check that chart that it's at the end of this document, because some states require certain things. And so all that's laid out for you for the whole country. So that's amazing. So wherever you are, whatever municipality, state you're in, any legal requirements that you're supposed to provide for your employees while they're at your place or while they're on the job would be in there. So, but these are some of the best practices that we've put together that you might find helpful. You may want to include them in your infectious prevention control plan. So we screen all of our employees when they come in. They report to their accounting office or the production office, and we have temperature guns down there, and we don't let anybody, probably ideally it's better if you gun them or take their temperatures before they get in the building, but we do it after. So this is a link to a thermometer that we found that works really well for us. It's about $60. Some of these things might be hard to find. Our employees were really thankful because we were able to upgrade from our rectal thermometer, so that was really helpful. I don't know why that won't close. I'll just minimize it here. So the other thing you might want to do is, obviously, we've talked to our employees about how to use the proper use of PPEs, hand washing, etiquette for sneezing, social distancing, discourage shaking hands, use non-contact methods of greeting. The other thing we do that's really important is we fog our shop, our factory, in our workspaces with a fogger. We got a Ryobi fogger and some concentrated disinfectant, and we fog our building on a routine basis. We pay special attention to some of the what we call high touch points, such as light switches, toilet seats, handles, faucets, doorknobs, vehicle gas caps, gas cans, anything that you might touch. And there's some guidance here for cleaning and disinfecting your facility. And there's also a link here to EPA approved products. Brian talked a little bit about the use of the approved products. So there's a complete list here of EPA approved products provided in this resource document. Some of the things that you may not think about, but yet, you should probably is, we use headsets for our customer service team. Obviously, you don't want to share those. If you have a second shift come in or people coming in the evening doing stuff, you don't want them to use the same headsets. Anything that's near their mouth, eyes, nose, anything like that. So you want to talk about, don't share work gloves, don't share or PPEs. You should wear disposable gloves while pumping gas. Use hand sanitizer. Joe's going to talk a little bit about the proper use of using disposable gloves. And also, when you're entering stores and facilities, you want to make sure that you use disposable gloves or disinfectant wipes on the door handles, shopping carts, etc., and pin pads would also be a way to kind of protect yourself from getting COVID or any infectious disease, right? So this is the other one. This is a question that we got earlier, and this is something that you probably want to adopt when you're handling customer transactions in the home. A good way to handle that is just have the customer insert their cash or their check into a Ziploc baggie. If you're using a slider or a Bluetooth thing that you insert the chip card reader into, have them do it, and you just ask them if you can draw a line through the signature line. That's perfectly legal as long as you get their, as long as they give you the permission. Just draw a straight line through it, and you're good. So, I'm going to have Joe talk a little bit about his, or as much as he wants, because this is kind of the reason why we're here. So this is all the things you can do as an employer to kind of protect your employees and your business before they get to the job site. So once they're in the home, Joe Ochal, who's really a gift to our industry, he's a microbiologist. He studied pathogenic microorganisms and conducted research on pandemics in West Africa, such as tuberculosis and Ebola. He's developed what he calls the in-home sanitary technique procedure. And he also owns a very highly rated home service business in the which is actually called the chimney scientist. So Joe is a chimney expert as well, and he's developed this. He's in the Philadelphia area. But with that, Joe, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you kind of talk about the in-home infection prevention and control plan that you've put together that we might be able to use in the field to kind of ease their customers' minds about having this in their home.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let me see if that comes up well. Let's see here. How's that, guys?
Okay, we got you.
Fantastic. So I put together the standard for in-home services with the help of Alan Rush and Jim Brewer. I've been very thankful to have them help me with this process. And it's kind of a baseline for how to do home services during an outbreak, and how to be as safe as possible to prevent infection of your workers as well as infection of your customers. In the coming months, Jim Brewer and I and Alan are going to be trying to create different levels of sanitary techniques similar to the chimney inspections you're familiar with, level 1, level 2, level 3, because we'd like to create a baseline guide for business as usual. After your areas are no longer considered an outbreak area, and things start to open up, there's still going to be a little bit of scare and things to be nervous about for probably years to come, and we're not sure exactly how it's going to pan out. So we want to, these standards are not always necessary if we don't have a pathogenic outbreak. So we want to create something just a little easier to handle. But in the meantime, we thought this was very valuable for the current COVID-19 outbreak. So I'd like to go over one thing really quickly. There's something called aseptic technique and surgical technique. These are techniques that are used to be sanitary and even sterile during surgery or working within a hospital. There's also something called clean technique, which is for industrial and also for commercial food processing, where they're all non-touch techniques, which means your hands are not going to be touching any of the products that you're working with that the consumer will touch, or the consumer in terms of a hospital. In-home services is the same, where you're not going to be touching anything within the home that you're not going to sanitize, or you're going to be wearing gloves for anything that you're going to touch. So let's see, that's the main difference there. We're trying to create something like a guideline in our industry that's similar to commercial food processing and things of that nature. So now I wanted to go over definitions. This, I think, is kind of important and kind of boring, but I thought of an interesting analogy. Think of glitter and butter. Imagine your hands and your body are just smothered in butter and covered in glitter. That's an excellent analogy for transient microorganisms and what is actually on our body. So our body produces oil, like constantly, called sebum, that is a protective barrier on the surface. And that oil is just covered in various skin cells, other eukaryotic cells, bacteria, and viruses. A lot of these things do not harm us. They're considered transient microorganisms. You're going to hear me say that term a lot for the rest of this talk. That's something that's on the surface that comes and goes as we touch and move around, and it's not necessarily something that harms us. There's also something called pathogenic microorganisms. That's something that harms us. COVID-19 is a pathogenic microorganism. The glitter and butter thing is important because it's going to help you visualize as you continue to make protocols for yourself and also work your way through sanitary technique. Visualize, is this actually going to make something sanitary? Is this not? Is this going to work? Or stuff like that. So transient microorganisms, pathogenic. There's a big difference between sanitizing, sterilization, and disinfecting. We're interested in sanitizing things. Sanitizing things is where we reduce the level of microorganisms. We're not trying to get rid of all of them. We're just trying to have them in a lesser amount. Why is that important? So believe it or not, like all viruses and bacteria that infect us have different infectious doses. So like the average bacterial cold, let's say it's like Staph aureus, it requires 10,000 little bacteria to be inside your body to infect you. If you have 9,000 bacteria, you're not going to get an infection. Okay, there are some viruses that are 10,000, some that are 1,000. But the point is that by reducing the number of organisms, sanitizing them, we can often eliminate disease. And sanitizing is a lot easier than sterilizing, which is no microorganisms. Okay, so the purpose is to do that. So if you're looking at, let's say your hand's covered in butter and glitter, and you touch a door handle and you look at it and it's covered in butter and glitter. If you then take like a bleach wipe and you wipe it, the actual process of the wiping is what's removing a lot of that glitter. And you're not going to get rid of all of it, but you're going to get rid of a good portion of it. The other thing is, when you're dealing with sanitizers, if you look at the CDC guidelines, they're in this document, and I also have a link here I can share later with all the different solutions. There's 358, I think, currently, so that could be a real headache to look at. We're currently just using a ratio of 12:1 bleach to water solution because we're having such a hard time finding disinfectants. So I want to get too bogged down in that, but if you look at that list and you look at all the different requirements for what's considered, if you spray this on this, it will sanitize it. It has time requirements. So like a lot of Lysols, if you spray them on the surface, they have to be on there for 5 minutes to reduce 99.9% of the microbial load on the surface. Okay, so you're thinking to yourself right now, how do I do that? Like, that's crazy. Well, luckily, we have the other solution, which is physical force. So when you combine physical force with sanitary solutions, you can remove the vast majority of the microbes. And anything that's left behind is now touched with that, bleach mixture or Lysol, and the majority of it can slowly denature as the Lysol kind of evaporates off. That's why it's usually pretty helpful to when you're sanitizing a door handle, not only spray it, but like wipe it, or just spray the cloth you have and then wipe the door handle or the surface. So I hope that I did a good idea of, or a good description of explaining how to sanitize things and why that's important with the analogy of glitter and butter. Okay, now let's move on to like a list of tools and what you would need for sanitary technique, and then we're going to quickly go through the steps. This document is about 25 pages. It's very detailed. It goes into like a bunch of different contingencies that we're not going to get into right now. But so if you have further questions, I believe John's going to be sending this out on Monday or Tuesday, so that you'll be able to read this in detail and hopefully get some guidance. Okay, so what are some of the things that you're going to need? The most important thing, I think, is the different types of gloves. So you're going to need disposable gloves, or you're going to need gloves that you can sanitize in between jobs. Personally, I think that, try to be as green as possible. I'd like to move towards sanitizing gloves and using them over and over again. Right now, we're just using disposable gloves. So your step 1 gloves, step 2 gloves, and step 3 gloves. Step 1 gloves are what you use when you're setting up your work area. Step 2 gloves are the gloves that you always have had, which are just, for dirty, messy jobs, keep your hands protected. Step 3 gloves are the gloves that you're going to use for cleaning up and the customer interaction. The next thing that you're going to need is a reusable heavy-duty work tarp, or you're going to have to use a disposable plastic. Reusable work tarp would be nice. You just have to sanitize it between jobs or keep several with you that you sanitize. I'd like to move towards that. Right now I'm using disposables. You're going to need a sanitary box that you keep your step 1, your step 3 gloves in, your paper towels, your disinfectant, and probably your disposable plastic for your sanitary barrier. If you keep that with you and you sanitize that daily or as frequently as you like, that's really going to help you reduce the amount of microorganisms in the areas you're working. Yeah, so I went over some of the spray bottles and the disinfectants. Okay, I wanted to go into the steps now. So talk about greeting the customer upon entering the property. You want to have your mask, you want to have your sanitary supplies visible and present. And when you knock on the door, you're not wearing your mask, you're going to move 6 feet away. from the door, but you want it all visible and present. Alan, could you talk about why we're knocking on the door without the mask and we have all of our stuff there and present?
Sure. Well, we want to be a person, right? There's a balance between still having a sales process and being human and being safe. And so when people see your face, you're a person. So I mean, it's really not that complicated.
Yeah. So we struggled with that, trying to be sanitary, but also getting trust and gaining trust with the customer was really important. So after you introduce yourself and you're ready to walk in, we have to set yourself up so that you have gloves and a mask on when entering the property. Step 1 gloves, the disposable gloves. So in this document, we're going to quickly talk about how to put gloves on and take gloves off. The step 1 and the step 2 gloves. Okay, so whenever you're putting on a glove, you grab it on the inside of the glove. So you're never touching the outside of it. You then essentially slide your other hand into that glove, and then you use the gloved hand to access the second glove for the second hand. This way, you're never touching the outside of the glove. This is going to be important when you're done because you're going to be touching all the surface inside the customer's house. You may be touching something the customer was touching. The customer may have COVID-19 or some other illness. And you may have done all this stuff to protect the customer. And when you take your gloves off, if you touch the outside of that glove, you then could potentially infect yourself. So taking off the gloves is just as important as putting them on. And you want to put your mask on before you put your gloves on. And then when you're taking it off, you want to take your mask off first and then take your gloves off. And we can talk about that in a second. So, using gloves when touching door handles, what I'd like to do is keep your sanitary box, keep it small, bring that in, and the first thing you do is you set up an area that's designated for sanitation supplies. This might be the most important thing. Why? Because we're all human. We all screw things up all the time. And you're going to be touching things by accident. You're going to be putting your tools in the wrong spot. You're going to be doing all of this stuff. So by having this area with your sanitary supplies right next to your work area, before you even bring in your work stuff, before you even create a sanitary barrier, you're going to be able to keep yourself from making more mistakes and feel more comfortable, not so worried. Because if you do make a mistake, oh, boom, got your sanitizer, you got your glove, you're done. Okay, so that's the first thing, is to set that up. Second thing is to create a sanitary barrier. You're still using your step 1 gloves. Every area you're going to work, you're going to put down a layer of plastic or a sanitized tarp. Why is this important? Because you're going to have transient microorganisms on your work stuff that you touch all the time, that other people are going to touch, maybe coming from house to house, dog hair, things like that. So you need that sanitary barrier to prevent the dog hair, the transient microorganisms from going from one house to the next, and so that you don't have to worry about it so much, in between jobs. So once you set up your sanitary barrier, you're going to set up all your work stuff. You're still going to be using your step 1 gloves for setting up your work stuff. At this point, you're essentially contaminating your step 1 gloves. That's okay. We're still reducing the amount of microorganisms. We're going to get ready eventually to sanitize all the door handles, when we leave. So that's okay. Now that you have all your work stuff set up, you're going to be putting on your step 2 gloves. That's going to be kept with your work stuff. Your step 2 gloves are just going to be dirty as usual, whatever. And there's certain things that if you want to sanitize them in your vehicle more, great. If you want to sanitize them in your vehicle less, that's fine too. As long as you're using sanitary technique, this stuff can be relatively, unsanitary. But I do encourage regular sanitation of your tools if possible. So now that you take off your step 1 gloves, put on your step 2 gloves, you're going to do your work. Okay, cool, little chimney inspection, whatever, cleaning. Once you're done that, you're going to clean up as much as you can, put everything back into everything. So now you're really only going to be touching the handles of your equipment. Let's say you got like a bucket with you. You can see the little chim scan I got. Everything is in my bags. And now I'm going to be moving over to the step 3 gloves. Okay, touching some of this stuff now with step 3 gloves isn't perfect, but we're still going to have a reduced amount of transient microorganisms. So it definitely helps us stay sanitary. We're going to be taking all of this stuff out of the house, you know, however you want to do it, put it directly outside or in the vehicle. And then you're going to be pulling up your sanitary barrier. Okay, so once the sanitary barrier is removed, very important, you know, you're going to sanitize every area of the exterior, you know, of the work area. That includes outlets. Sometimes we forget about outlets. And I heard a question came in a couple days ago. Let's say you're working in a gas fireplace with a remote, something that your customer touches a lot. What you might want to do there is on your sanitary barrier, you know, when you first get started, just spray it down or wipe it down with your, you know, with your bleach cloth or your Lysol cloth or whatever it is. Let it sit, you know, for a minute, and then start to work on it. Take the batteries out, whatever you have to do. Do everything you need to do. Put it back together, and then wipe it again with the bleach cloth and set it aside. That should be pretty adequate in terms of sanitizing it, and that's fine. So if you have to touch things that they touch, that's what I recommend. You got some knobs on the fireplace, just wipe them down with the bleach, you know, rag. And remember how I said, you know, force is very important when you're dealing with glitter and butter. So that could be helpful. So there's a couple other scenarios, but let's just say you're done, right? We're going to talk about credit card processing in a second, but let's say you're done. So now you're walking out of the house, the customer's paid, whatever. You're going to sanitize both sides of the door handles. Once you sanitize both sides of the door handles and you're leaving, we are going to take off your gloves. Now you're done with the customer. We're going to go back and talk about processing, but let's just say you're done. Removing these gloves. So very important. You've now just touched a bunch of stuff in this customer's home. Take a pinch of the first glove, roll it off. As it rolls off, grab it with your other hand. Then pinch the underside of the glove, just like you did when you put them on, and roll it off, and now just throw that out. Okay? Once you've done that, remember this is reverse order. Now take your mask off, and you're good to leave, you're good to go. This way you didn't contaminate your face using those gloves to remove your mask. Let's talk about credit card processing, and then we'll be wrapping up pretty quickly. So credit card processing and paper. So I know a lot of people use paper, and the unfortunate reality is now is never a better time to move to paperless. I mean, a lot of customer brochures are available online for a lot of the brochures you're already using. And it's almost impossible to figure out a way to really, stay sanitary using paper and trading it with customers and having customers touch it and sign it and things like that. So, I would probably contact CSIA. Alan had a couple ideas. Maybe talk to Alan about different ways if you want to transition. But definitely transitioning to paperless is going to be necessary to maintain sanitary technique protocol. So let's say you need to get this phone. Well, one of the problems is gloves don't always work on your phone or your tablet. Okay, so it's like, oh man. Well, what you're going to do here is you're going to take your phone, which is absolutely disgusting if you put it under a microscope, and you're going to spray that thing down, wipe it down, and let it sit for just a second. If you can't let it sit, that's okay, because once again, we're going to be using force, and we're going to be using bleach or Lysol. Let the customer sign it, if they have to sign it. I like John Meredith's idea of the line. I think it's a way better idea, but some customers are a little crazy or forceful. I shouldn't say crazy. So if they have to touch it, then that wipe it down first. Once they're done touching it, wipe it down again. Put it in your pocket. If you've already taken off your level 3 gloves, it's okay. If you can't put them back on, I understand. When you're leaving the house, use your bleach solution and your cloth and wipe down the door handles, and that should be fine. So I think that's the bulk of it. Now, if you really read through some of the additional scenarios later, that will probably be helpful for you. But like I said, in the coming weeks or months, Jim Brewer and Alan and I we're definitely looking for input, because as you use these things and as I've been using them, there's sometimes like certain difficulties or obstacles. I'd love to hear those obstacles so we could take them into account. But I hope I gave you a good, way that you can kind of go through this, some good guidelines to implement in your company, and also a slightly better understanding of microbiology.
Well, Joe, thank you. I mean, if we were all in the room together, I'd probably give you a standing ovation right now. You've been amazing. So I appreciate you sharing your wisdom and
Yeah,
insight.
thank you very much.
A couple quick questions that came up. One, personally, I'd like to know what has been I'm assuming you're practicing this in the field. What has been the reaction from your customers when they see you performing your job like this?
Well, it's fantastic, and it's really saved, I think, a lot of sales. I had customers that we had installations set up. They were ready to, they called to cancel. This has happened several times. And my office staff now has all this information. And they just send them a link to our website saying, hey, just so you know, we're going to be implementing these techniques, and like much less cancellations, much less problems, just from that. It probably goes further than that. We're going to be getting new wraps. If you're not getting new wraps, I would consider magnets, magnets where you have your own technique or sanitary technique on the back showing that you're doing this during this period. But we're going to be putting essentially the back of our vehicles that we're implementing sanitary technique, because even though this is kind of a short-term, outbreak, this is going to kind of go on for some time in terms of fear, and we want to alleviate fear, protect our customers, and protect our employees as well.
Can I ask a question, John, for Joe? Like, how are you? And I know we've developed this together a little bit, but the way that most people are going through the process, right? They go in, they greet the customer, they do their work, they sweep the chimney, they clean up their work, and then they work up their inspection reports, their proposals, their whatever presentation they're going to come and do a sit down. And I don't want to tangent into sit down conversations, but more the order of sanitary technique. Are you recommending that they leave all the equipment the way that it is, go out, work up their inspection, their proposal, come back into the home, have that conversation with the client, and then after we've presented everything, then we do step 3 gloves and remove everything? Or are you kind of cleaning up the whole work area first and then going in and doing an actual presentation?
Well, the first, and the main reason is because I want the customer to see on the camera the inside of the chimney 100%. So it would be better if I can't, but once again, this sanitation is awesome because it doesn't have to be perfect. It's all about everything we talked about. So that's the answer is showing the customer everything while you're still set up.
A couple questions that came in I'm going to get to here. Before I do, I'm just curious, how much extra time does this take on a service call before you started doing this to compare to after you started doing it? Is there a time troll there?
Well, great question. It's a learning curve. Okay, so it's like anything else. I would say now that we're all set up, maybe an additional 10 minutes, maybe. Right?
So once you get proficient at it, as far as scheduling goes, you don't need to schedule an extra, hour or anything like that. It's just a 10-minute, essentially, what you're saying.
No, and the first time I did it, I took probably about 30 minutes, making mistakes, and that's why I implemented the sanitary bottle right away. And once you have that sanitary bottle, you feel so much more your employee will feel so much more comfortable.
Yeah, nice.
They won't feel like they're going to get yelled at, and the customer is going to feel comfortable. It's the first thing the customer sees is you put this all down, and they're like, oh, okay, they're like totally prepared for this.
I can just imagine customers talking about this with their neighbors, because I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that said, yeah, I was talking to Carter Hawkins at Spark Marketer the other day, and he said he was, just looking outside, and there was an HVAC van. They were servicing the home. They weren't doing anything special. And then there was an article in USA Today a couple of weeks ago where they said, people are scared to repair, right? And I stole the title from them because I thought it was great. But I think, and they talked about how the customer or the homeowner should sanitize after the service provider left. And I thought that's ridiculous. While you're getting on the other side of this, and I really appreciate you coaching up our industry, because I really think this is the future of home services for a while. So I think if the guys who adopt this and really run with it, both internally and in home, are going to really be the ones that are going to be talked about in their market. So I got some quick rapid fire questions here. Are you wearing gloves when you knock on the door?
No.
Okay.
No.
You're wearing booties. is that, I said, notice you're wearing booties, good idea anyway. Is it, not dirty the customer home, but does it help with protection and all the booties?
It does. It does. Yeah, it does. I could explain more, but yeah, it does.
I think brevity is a good key here. We're gonna
Yeah.
so I want to get Alan to get down. We're going to leak over a little bit, and I really appreciate everyone's hanging in there with us. I think we're all experiencing a little Zoom fatigue these days, but so the vacuum cleaner. Talk about the movement of the air in the house from the vacuum cleaners. Is there a way to? The question is, do you sanitize that inside and out for every job? And I don't know that you'd be able to sanitize the inside of it.
So if you're sneezing as an individual worker, that's going to be covered by your mask. So you're not really putting anything in there. The individual customer, like sneezing and particles in the home, a lot of that should be catched by the HEPA filter and contained by the HEPA filter.
So just maybe a wipe down of your equipment after you handle it. If you handle it with your hands, would be sufficient. Some routine basis. This is a great question here on business cards. Some customers don't want you to hand them paper, right? So they don't want to take a business card from you. So, is there a digital business card or something like that?
There is. That's exactly. There are apps out there where you can tap your business card to the person, or you can text it, or you can, if you have a company phone. But anything that you do that we struggled with this when we were on brochures, paper, business cards. This is where the levels come in, right? As right now, it's serious. Maybe as this thing dies down a little bit, we'll be able to reintroduce things. But anything that you do with paper is taking away from the sanitary technique. And so, if you give them a brochure, you give them a business card, you are passing those pathogens to the client. So under this process, we're recommending that you do not do that.
Okay.
But obviously tell them we're going to email them, tell them all these things. Like, obviously this isn't normal. Normally we would shake hands right now. Right now we're going to do the little elbows or, whatever we're doing. I've been out in the field the last couple of days, and people are they're getting it. They absolutely understand what's going on, and they're not joking as in ha, but they're rolling along with the process and understand why we're doing these things.
So a couple more questions I want to get to, then I'm going to get to Alan here. So what's the dwell time needed for a bleach solution? Is there a concern about discoloration, things like that?
Great question. So that's one of the reasons I recommend using a cloth, spraying the cloth and then wiping down surfaces. I wouldn't take a spray bottle and spray the door handle and potentially mess up, the paint or something like that. And like I said, it can be very confusing. Like, there are many different sitting times to make sure that something's completely sanitary. That's why it's kind of a bonus, or what helps you is the moving of microbes. So I wouldn't focus too much on that, but I wanted to explain that because I think if you look online at these CDC guidelines and you see the list, you see like, oh, 5 minutes, like how am I going to do that? So hopefully I answered that.
Yeah, and I will tell you the CDC recommends 1/3 of a cup of bleach per gallon of water as a sanitizing solution. So I know bleach has been sometimes hard to get, probably a little less expensive than some of the other things. Bleach is kind of a harsh chemical. I don't prefer to use it. I prefer to use some of the quaternary formulas that, I think for my preference, they also have some surfactants in them, so they do a little better cleaning. Canvas tarp, is it one and done, or do you reuse that?
So a canvas tarp, your work tarp, would be used over and over again.
Okay. What phrase? Okay, I'm going to get into that. Let's see. Do you suggest using a different coverall or uniform for each client, so that nothing's transmitted from clothing to their property?
No, not in terms of this outbreak. No.
Okay. Yeah, there's a question about having difficulty finding sanitary supplies. The bleach solution.
Yeah, that's why we started using bleach, because we
maybe
couldn't find anything
available. Yeah, maybe the most available.
Yeah.
There's some. I think that pretty much takes care of these questions. If you could just take your screen share off there, Joe, and I want to get back to Alan. I know you've been into a lot of homes lately, and Alan Rush is president of of Rush Profits, and he's a just an amazing in-home sales consultant. He's worked with a lot of chimney guys. He's been in a lot of homes. Alan, I would just share from your experience at a high level what you're seeing out there, and then talk a little bit about your experience that you had recently where you rented a car.
Yeah. So I think the key here is if you're going to tell people that you do this stuff, you have to do it, right? I will let the guilty stay guilty and won't call names, but I did rent a car, and they sent me this amazing email saying, all the stuff that they were going to be doing, that they were going to be, the people met me, they would have gloves, they would have a touchless system, they were deep cleaning the cars. Man, I got there and it was the wild, wild west, man. This guy came up to me and he was like, no gloves, literally reached out to shake my hand. I was like, what are you doing, man? And so used an iPad. And so I was very conscientious, because we've been working on this, of all the things that he wasn't doing, which is bad enough, right? But the point was, and I get it, it's a big organization. Their corporate put out a message to gain business when people are scared, and they weren't following through. And to me, that was a bad touch. So my point on that is simply, if you're going to, if you were on the last call with about social media and branding and marketing and pre-appointment emails and the conversations you're having on the phone with your customers about what our tech's going to be doing in the home, if you're going to be giving that message, then you have to do it. Otherwise, it's actually irresponsible to tell your customer you're going to do that and not. It could literally be putting someone in danger. So that's my point on that. And as far as in the field, I've got clients that are all over the nation, and there's certainly different places are feeling it in different ways. In Florida, where I'm at right now, it's a little crazy. They'll give you $1,000 fine if you walk outside without a mask in Broward County. The police are at the grocery stores, and they are letting you in one at a time. So things there are a lot more serious than right now I'm in Tennessee. And it's almost like it doesn't exist here outside of the homes that we're going in. And so the takeaway here is that the people that are calling us into their home are serious. We're seeing much higher close rates than we normally see, especially on estimates. They're not just calling you out for fun or entertaining stuff. They're home, they're wanting jobs done. So if you're getting in the home and people are calling you, then you're much more likely to get a sale. Obviously sweeps and some of the non-essential things, we're not really doing those as much right now. But if it's work, if it's leaks, if it's repairs, if it's new stoves, we're selling those at a much higher rate, and I'm seeing that across the nation. The one point I want to make sure that I definitely get across is, and I've noticed this a lot here in Tennessee, is half the customers feel that this thing's all bogus still. Like they would shake your hand and give you a hug if you let them, and so some of our customers' guards are down, and they're not treating this as serious as it needs to be. And so I encourage you, it's your responsibility to follow these protocols, or follow whatever your company decides you're going to do. You do that regardless of the comfort level of your customer, because you don't know if you're asymptomatic, you don't know if you're potentially passing something along, or if they're asymptomatic and passing something to you. You bring it back to your company, now all of a sudden you've shut down an entire organization and take the money out of it, just the potential health consequences. So my point is that if they're letting you in your home now, they probably are not seeing this as a big deal. And you're going to sell those people. The gap, and as I've talked to people around the country, the big gap, the one consistency is that the phones are slower. Business is slowing down. People aren't calling at the rate that they normally do. And so the purpose of this sanitary technique is to bridge the gap of those people that otherwise would not call. And so they would not call because they're scared. They don't want employees infecting them. They don't want to infect their employees. So if you will take this technique and brand it out on your social media and out on your vans, all those types of things, then I think that you're going to start getting an increase in calls that you otherwise wouldn't have got. And then once we get this thing to level 1, level 2, level 3, we'll have some protocols into how we can take down the severity of each of these steps and still be effective based on the level of contagion that's going on.
Let's go all panels. That's good. A couple more questions I want to get to, and then we'll close here. What about two guys in a work truck? I know I was talking to a sweep and they were sending 2 trucks, one guy in each van. So
I've got guys that are doing it both ways. I've got a company I was with yesterday. We did, like I'm usually doing the ride along when we called it the ride behind. I was driving the truck behind the guy and we were doing that. And today I was in a vehicle. So it's one of those things that I think each company has to decide. Every company should be doing what you said, taking temperatures as they're coming in. I know that made me feel so much better coming in, knowing that every person had been checked and at least wasn't running a temperature at that point. So that's a nice thing for your employees as well as something you can tell your customers that you're doing.
nice. Tom Hunkel had a question about more information about the e-card, and we just sent a link out to the panelists and attendees where you get information on that. This might be also for Joe. Is there how long does this virus tend to live on fabrics?
Ooh, so there's an incredible amount of inconsistent information even within the government regarding these things. We know coronavirus, which is a class of viruses, they could live anywhere from 3 hours to 7 days. Early on, we heard viral particles as long as 12 days. Good news is this, they last longer on stainless steel than they do on fabric. They last the least amount on fabric compared to most inanimate objects. So I can't really give you a definite answer, but that's just general coronavirus knowledge. I'm sorry I couldn't do more.
If guys are working in
story,
trucks,
Joe, that you told about the cruise ships, how long they were finding still live coronavirus after?
Yeah, so that ended up coming out in the media. It was wrong and got corrected. So
Okay.
it was 17 days of viral particles, which means pieces of virus that aren't necessarily alive.
wow. So another question came in I want to address real quick is when you recommend wearing masks when they're not in a customer's home? Let's say you got a couple guys that have to ride together, they should probably be wearing masks, I would guess.
Yeah, all my guys do, just to be safe when they're together.
Nice. Well, I think so. Let's, Joe. Let me get back to my screen real quick, and let's try to put a bow on this thing. I want to thank everyone for being on the call today. I've always, if you heard me speak, I talk about the gift of your presence as being the best gift we can give, and certainly you guys have been here and hung in with us. We're so appreciative for you. And I want to talk a little bit about communicating to your customers and your employees. So I think that I just love this quote by George Bernard Shaw: "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." So once you develop your in-house systems, I think it's really important to communicate that at every time you can with all of your employees, right? So, and then there were some questions that came in about communicating these things with your customers. And so so my best thoughts on that are that we should communicate. I would hire a marketing firm to help you brand this message. And, someone who's familiar with our industry, there's a couple great ones out there. You probably know who they are. And just develop a consistent branded message around Joe's in-home sanitary technique and procedure. So, obviously you want to shout it from the rooftops, put it on your website, social media, postcards, billboards, band wraps, phone scripts, emails, any place you can. And I think that will, and also this will help you to ease the customer's fears about having you in their homes. We need to understand that there's just no more business as usual. Just like airline travel changed after 9/11, the world of in-home services has changed because of this coronavirus, right? So, I promise you that the Guild, the CSIA, and all of us as stakeholders will be with you all the way, doing everything we can to help you succeed in this business. And I believe the faster you acknowledge this new reality and adapt to it, the quicker your business will come back as things start to ease up. Guys, I just want to let you know, you're not a survivor, you're a thriver. And these are all the things that Guild is doing to help you thrive in this business. We appreciate you so much. We couldn't do this without you and our members. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chuck. And Chuck, would you close us out?
Yeah, thank you very much, John. John, Brian, Joe, and Alan, thank you very much for your time and your expertise on this subject. This is something that's benefiting our trade and industry, and it's very important that we really think about the future, as John just said. On behalf of Jasper and myself, we want to thank all of you for joining this webinar, which is brought to you by the National Chimney Sweep Guild and the Chimney Safety Institute of America, with special patronage from John Meredith of Saver Systems and Heat Shield. Our association believes in our members and the credential holders, and we are in complete alignment in helping our trade. And we're going to do this by providing timely topics, which is going to give you the best return on investment for attending our webinars. Next week at 4 p.m., same time, Eastern Standard Time, which is Thursday the 30th, the next topic is going to be resilient in business marketing and strategies for now and what to do next. So you'll be emailed a survey after this webinar, and we would like you to complete it. We're looking for the return of this so we can provide good content for you going forward. We want to be relevant for what's going to help you thrive as we go forward into the future. We are not going to stop. CSIA and NCSG are with you. Remember, you ain't heavy, you're our brother. Stay safe and see you all next week. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.